Do, singing my morning song, ready to have my breakfast and coffee because I love... there's no bowls in the cupboard. Walt must have forgotten to unload the dishwasher. And the dishwasher wasn't even turned on last night. Walt!
Skibbidi-bop-bop-bop-a-doo, singing my morning song because I'm legally obligated to. Yeah?
You forgot to run the dishwasher last night, and now there's no clean dishes. I'm gonna have to eat my Cocoa Pops out of a cup or something. Nope, there's no cups either. I guess I'll just eat it out of my slippers, shall I?
Oh, you clearly haven't had your morning coffee made with Red Bull instead of water. There's no need to be so snarky. I think you'll find it was actually your job to turn the dishwasher on last night. It's right here on the chart. See? Saturday nights, James to turn on the dishwasher, and Sunday morning, Walt to unload the dishwasher.
Walt, that chart is so full of duties. It's written in like font size 8, and it rotates and changes so often I can't keep up. Look, I was out last night. Would it have not been easier for you just to turn on the dishwasher?
And rob you of the joy of fulfilling your duty to the household? I couldn't do that to you, James, and it's not that bad. Take a look and tell me what else you have to do today.
Well, let me get my magnifying glass first.
Just read it.
Fine. All right, I have to take out the trash, water the plants, and rearrange the herbs and spices to the Sunday not alphabetically like Monday through Saturday. On Sundays, we arrange by an ombre of colors. Well, this is insane. I'm not doing that.
We all have our duties, James. Now, chop chop. I'll catch up with you at lunch. I'm off to clean the bathroom, walk the cat, sweep the laundry, polish the bed, and fold the shopping.
We have an efficient way of living together, that's for sure.
Yeah. In the skit first, we live together, and we do it well, depending on your definition of doing it well.
In real life, when we lived together, we were the only ones that ever did chores in that share house.
There was no chart. If there was a chart, it just said Walt and James. Everything.
Do everything.
Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP, brought to you by POG. Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast, where a thimble is a kiss, but a ball of string is not a hug. I'm your host, Walt.
It's like the thimble, like the sewing thing?
Peter Pan thing.
Peter Pan reference.
Yeah.
Hello, Commander players. I'm currently under witness protection, but I'm not meant to talk about that. James.
You've got a 1-mana blue enchantment on you.
Yeah, true.
It's making you a 1/1 citizen. Green and white.
Unsuspected citizen or whatever it's called.
Before we get to this week's transmission, we have a new platform. I'd only heard of this like a week ago for the first time. We have a Substack now.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about this. Walt sent me a text and was like, oh, can you put this potentially just in the template for our next episode?
Yeah.
We've got a Substack now. I'm like, what is a Substack?
So basically, it's kind of a platform for written content, but you can also do podcasts there. So I've uploaded our whole back catalog there, but mostly the main thing is I had some people say that they like to read Thrifty Thursdays and other sort of written content that we produce, but they don't want to be in the Discord because it's not a platform they use. They don't really use social media. So yeah,
Can I just say, respects to all of you guys out
100%.
there that aren't on Discord and aren't on social media. In this world, you're a rarity.
It's true.
Good for you.
We're so surrounded by Zoomers, me and James, most of the time. We forget that there's other people who exist.
Yeah.
But yes, you can subscribe to our Substack. It's linked in the show notes. So you can get notified when new episodes come out, but also there'll be Thrifty Thursdays going up there every Thursday.
And you get them old-fashioned in your inbox.
It's true. It's also I'm going to be experimenting with writing a slightly longer version for Substack, where basically I'll do the exact post, the weird, goofy monologue dialogue with the card.
Oh, for Thrifty Thursdays.
For Thrifty Thursdays, specifically for Substack. So there'll be the Thrifty Thursdays goofy card, dialogue monologue thing. And then I'm also going to write a little description of why I think the card is good.
Oh, some extra insights.
Yeah, look, Substack seems like it prioritizes the written word, so I thought I'd write some more words for you. So yeah, if you'd like to subscribe to our Substack, that'll be linked in the show notes.
Fair enough. I am already subscribed, and I didn't actually notice that there was extra content, so I'm going to go and read that tonight.
You're welcome.
Another thing, just to very quickly say, huge congrats to the winners of our 100 episode giveaway bonanza.
That was just the other day. Hey,
congrats to Macy6677, who, by the way, it was her birthday yesterday as time of recording this. So happy birthday, Macy.
Happy birthday, Macy. Enjoy the giveaway.
Really happy to message you on your birthday to be like, hey, you've won
what great news.
The binder and the Genesis case and the Rec Tower. But a big congratulations to Jin Host Migration for winning the first place giveaway, which had the playmat, the cards, all that kind of stuff. It is a huge stack. And when I was talking to Jin was like, I'm not got a playmat at the moment. So this is a really big upgrade.
That'll be your first playmat will be assigned to get commanded playmat. There's something very sweet about that.
I'm really happy it's going to someone that's like going to get good use out of it. It's not just going to live on a shelf somewhere.
If someone gave me a playmat, I'd be like, cool, I'll play this once every 4 months when I rotate through the rest of my stack.
And then if you look in my cupboard.
Oh, yeah. I know what's in your cupboard, bro.
Yeah, you organized it for me. How many playmats did you count when you
I didn't count.
Organizing?
I reckon it's in the realm of 20.
It's roughly 20. Because I got like all 5 basic lands. Yeah. So that's 5 right there.
There's about 3 that you pretty much never use, and they're not great. Not going to lie.
Kind of old and ready.
There's a good 10 playmats in there that are fantastic. Yeah. And then there's one of every basic, the John Avon.
Unsanctioned?
Unglued? Unsanctioned sounds right.
I think unsanctioned.
We'll go with unsanctioned.
But yeah, look, obviously the giveaway is over, but we will probably do more. And by probably, I mean, we will for sure be doing more giveaways in the future. So make sure to follow us on all of our social medias and jump in our Discord to find out when we're going to do the next giveaway, because the guys at Palms Off Gaming love giving us stuff to give away. And we love giving stuff away to you. So it'll probably be soon. So make sure to follow us on all of that and jump in the Discord.
Definitely. But we have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
The commander of your deck performs an essential role, and this role can inform the deck's construction for optimal sequencing.
Now, just to be clear here, I'm assuming that they mean role as in like a responsibility, not the role as in the MTG mechanic, the aura token rolls.
I was thinking you going the other way of your deck performs an essential rolling. It rolls over very well.
Well, I hope it's protected in the Genesis Palms Off Gaming deck box.
I hope it's a D6 and we're going to roll a 6 on it. No, obviously they're talking about the fact that your commander does a particular thing in the command zone. And yeah, you should basically plan your whole deck around what your commander actually does.
It seems bizarrely simple.
Yes.
But I think that we've talked about this a few times, and we've referenced it a few times. We've never dedicated a whole transmission to it.
No.
I feel like it sounds so simple to be like, your commander is the build around, so build around it. But a lot of the time, I think the commander is like often selected, and then we focus so much on the 99 and making sure the 99 is functioning and all this kind of stuff that we forget to consider how the commander is going to impact that game plan and why we selected it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, in our deck building template, I suppose we've mentioned that your commander might fulfill one of the slots of the cards that we make sure we include in our deck building template, like card draw, like ramp, like removal, etc. But yeah, it's very rare that we say, oh, and by the way, because your commander does this, you should do this. But it is really important to do it. I agree with the Space Commanders.
So we've selected our commander for a reason. How do we leverage it?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting at for this episode.
Yeah.
But I think we should kind of hone in on that role word a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I did open this command a little early. And I
got that impression.
A little bit interested because I dived into the EDH Rec website, which, by the way, is brandly updated. Their user interface looks phenomenal now. If you've not been on EDH Rec in a week, go look at it. It's great. So obviously just went onto the top commanders and was like, I'm going to have a look to see if I can identify roles of commanders, like what kind of roles they play in the command zone. And I just went on the top. I went into a couple of different color combinations to try and get a different variation. And I did find that there was some like common themes of
Right.
like the duties. And I boiled it down to about 7 different kind of roles, 7 different duties the commanders play.
That sounds about right. I feel like there's definitely some like really obvious, differences between, like even if you're playing a typal deck, there's typal decks where you make more of the type of creature if you have your commander out. And then there's, your Abomination of Llanowars, which is more like a payoff for how many elves you have. So
Yeah.
I imagine that the categories are going to sort of resemble these things that we see already.
100%. And there's different reasons why you would want to choose one versus the other and all that kind of stuff. Now, I want to make it very clear at the top of this section before we go and actually start defining which like role is which. Is I don't think you should think about your commander being shoehorned into one role. We're obviously going to give some examples of each of these categories,
Sure.
but don't try and shoehorn your commander into one role and only think about it through that lens, because then you're missing out on a whole nother aspect of that commander.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it makes sense. Like, it's very rare that a commander does only one thing, especially in 2024.
Yeah,
we
well,
increasingly
the amount
have,
of text that's on cards.
Yeah, we very often have commanders with 2 different abilities that synergize with each other, right? Like, whenever you do this thing happens. And when this thing happens, sometimes other things happen.
Yeah.
Or, your payoff for this other thing happening is this other thing.
Yeah, and then you can tap a bunch of the things that I did before and get a payoff for that.
Yeah, very common these days, especially in typal decks, I would say.
All right, should we dive into
Let's do it.
my categories?
Let's see some categories.
The first one that I identified, and this is probably one of the most common ones that I saw, I'm calling them enhancing commanders.
I would say a good chunk of my decks fit this category. And this is like, I mean, we spoke about this kind of recently, right? In episode 97, win conditions and enhancers. We spoke about like win cons versus enhancers, the difference between the two. But yeah, basically, an enhancer is a card that it's not a win con on its own, right? This is a card that it tends to be the nitrous oxide in the engine is the one that we often bring up, but it's the thing that accelerates you towards a winning board state rather than a win con, which is the thing that wins you the game. So
takes a winning board state and wins you the game with it.
Yeah. So often the examples that we bring up in a token deck, a deck that's trying to go wide, make a bunch of different things. The difference between a win con and enhancer is the difference between a card like Anointed Procession, make twice as many tokens when you make tokens. That's an enhancer. And Overrun, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. That's your win con. That's the card that wins you the game. The enhancer might get you to the winning board state, but it doesn't on its own, on a single card, on a single turn, win you the game. It's the thing that gets you towards that winning board state.
Exactly right. And look, we have seen more legendary creatures printed with, if you do X, do X again. Do it twice. Do it 3 times. Fuck it. Some commanders go even one step further, like the Elishnorn, Mother of Machines, is like, your enter the battlefields happen twice. Your opponents do none.
Yeah, or the O'Hare Asheneel. No. There's the O'Hare, I forget which one, the white one of the legendary like creature gods from the new Ixalan set that says if you would make tokens, create triple that many tokens instead.
Anointed Procession stapled on with another Anointed Procession in the command zone.
Exactly.
Crazy.
It's a very common, and we saw five Boots Felix only a couple of sets ago, doubles your combat damage triggers. Like every set basically has one these days.
And I think it's just a thing that we can expect to see more and more from Wizards of the Coast, because these commanders are the commanders that people are attracted to. They're played very often. If you go on to the top commanders on EDH Rec, you'll see a lot of these effects. The other thing that I think these commanders do is they typically make a weaker strategy stronger.
Absolutely.
So, and like, especially... And it'll make a strong, pretty supported strategy completely busted.
Absolutely.
Like the case of O'Hare, the tokens one.
Triple tokens. Yeah. Or even like a Teysa Karlov is a good example, right?
That's a great example.
You build an Aristocrats deck, you're already in black and white, which are probably the most essential colors to building Aristocrats in. And now you have a thing that says if creatures die, it triggers twice that many times. And bizarrely, creature tokens you control have Vigilance and Lifelink. Who thought that up?
There wasn't enough on the card yet. They needed to slap something else
Unbelievable. Also gives you the means to get that life total to then, turn on your Aetherflux Reservoir and stuff like that. But yeah, it's very commonly a thing that you put in the command zone because it gives you a really obvious thing. Okay, I'm going to fill my deck with the things that my commander will make better.
Yeah.
If I have Teysa Karlov in the command zone, okay, I'm playing an Aristocrats deck. I'm trying to sacrifice things. I'm trying to gain life. And then Teyzekalov will just be that cherry on top of do it twice that much, do it twice that much later in the game.
I mean, I want to play a Dragons deck, so I'm going to put an enhancer like Mirim, Sentinel Worm in my command zone. And now all my dragons are 2 dragons.
Wild.
I've got now Panharmonicon in the command zone because I'm playing Yarok the Desecrated. I'm now doubling my spell triggers with Veyrun, Voice of Duality. Like
Ishin, 2 heavens is 1.
Attack triggers
you build an attack trigger deck, and now you got twice as many attack triggers.
Even my Urza deck, which so not Urza deck, my Tornos Urza's Apprentice deck, I should say.
Urza's young student.
Disciple.
Urza's disciple deck.
But like Tornos definitely is an enhancer in the command zone. Instead of it like having a static ability, it's an activated ability, but it's still a enhancer.
It's copying a triggered ability of an artifact source. So again, I think the appeal of these cards is they are very, like in terms of picking a commander that does this, I think new players are drawn to commanders like these. And I think that's a really good thing. Because these
are quite simple.
Yeah, these are commanders that tell you explicitly, this is what I want you to do. Build a deck that does this, I'll make it better. Like, I think these are a really great place to begin. And yeah, if you want a deck that's really straightforward as well, if you're someone who gets complicated things tend to make you a bit stressed, commanders like this are really good for that.
100%. And now we move on to our next category. And wouldn't it shock you that because we talked about it just recently, the next category is win condition commanders.
Well, there you go. This is exactly the inverse of the win con enhancers thing. So these are the commanders that come in and they're the final blow. So you set up your whole board state and then you deploy this commander and usually you'll win the game either that turn, maybe the turn after that. Very commonly, these commanders have a very high mana value, right?
That's usually a good indicator that they're probably going to be like a end game commander, is that if they're 6 CMC and up, that's usually a good indicator of like, I'm not trying to cast this quickly. No. I'm trying to set something up before I cast this.
Brutaclad Telcor Engineer would be a really classic example here. This is the 4 blue-red. He's like a Mir or something. I don't know.
Phyrexian.
I think he's a Phyrexian Mir, right? He'd have to be, because it looks very Mir looking in the art. But you, at the beginning of combat on your turn, well, it gives tokens you control haste. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you make a 2/1 blue Mir, and then you can have all of your tokens become a copy of target token you control. Full stop. Not until end of turn.
So yeah, the ideal scenario is before you cast Brutaclad, you set your board state up to have this commander come in, make a token, and then make all of your tokens a copy of the best token you have.
It's pretty linear, right? Like you want stuff that makes a bunch of tokens so that you have a bunch of things to copy, and then you tend to want one really great token to make everything a copy of.
Like the 10/10 from Desolation Twin or something like that.
I loved when you had a Brutaclad deck, your Mimic Vat was a really great one, right? You've tucked something under there, Mimic Vat exiles the card, makes a token copy of it. So yeah, you make a token copy of basically anything you
that
want.
Died, the best thing that had died in that game is probably mine.
Turn your 10/1/1 Mir into that thing that died. It's an unbelievable and probably game-winning thing to do that.
But like Kamal Heart of Krosa is kind of like a probably more obvious
classic
one. It's just overrun in the command zone. So it's 6 green. Is it 8 mana?
8 mana altogether.
And then at the beginning of combat, creatures you control get +3/+3 in trample. Yep. And also it has the activated ability where you can pump and turn... pump 2 mana into it, 1 and a green.
1 and a green.
And you can turn a land into a
3/3. Oh no,
it's a 1/1 because then it gets pumped.
With Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, I think. Yeah. And then, the pump will make it a 4/4.
I do want to shout out a commander that I recently came across. And by recently, I mean on Friday night, played against...
So 2 days before this was recorded.
Yeah, one of the guys from Casual Compliance, Mike Chilibin, as otherwise known, played Thromok the Insatiable against me.
Okay.
Have you ever seen this card?
I've never heard of this card.
Neither had I, and I was like, what the hell does this commander do? For 3 red and a green, you get a 0/0 Hellion.
Okay, great start.
Great start. And it has, this is the busted bit, Devour X, where X is the number of creatures devoured this way. So, if you're unfamiliar with the term Devour is a mechanic where it's Devour N, so Devour a number. Yeah. So if you have Devour 2, you can sacrifice any number of creatures.
Yeah, well, it's an ETB, right? It enters the battlefield, you sacrifice any number of creatures, and if it's Devour 2, you put 2 counters on it for every creature you sacrifice.
It's actually not an ETB, it's as this enters the battlefield.
Oh, like a clone sort of
kind of like a clone.
Sure.
It kind of happens on the resolution of the spell, I believe. Sure. Don't quote me on that. Yeah. I need to read up on the rules a little bit more.
But this is Devour X, where the X is the number of creatures. So if you sacrifice 10 creatures, you put 10 counters on it for every creature sacrificed.
Yes.
So you sacrifice 10 creatures, you put 100 counters on this thing.
Yes. Yes.
That's insane.
It is absolutely busted. And like, I didn't realize what the deck was going to do. And it didn't actually get to pop off. Unfortunately, Chili didn't get to do the thing. But I looked through his deck afterwards and I was like, oh yeah, Chandra's Ignition. That'll do it.
That's true.
Like, so
you die,
you
everyone
make
else.
this commander ungodly big.
That's crazy. I mean, this is 100% a win con, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
just said it. Technically, you need a Chandra's Ignition or something, but even a fling,
But
right?
it's like, it is...
Do Devour,
It
then
is
fling it at someone.
I think it's like step 1 to the win con, right?
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, it's still a win con commander because you can't cast this early.
It's not an enhancer.
What? And it's not a commander that you would want to cast before you do anything else,
No,
right?
it's the thing that you play just before you win. Absolutely.
I think
That's
this
crazy.
deck was really good looking. I'm glad I got to shout it out.
Yeah, definitely.
But also, like, you know, other commanders like Jetmir, Nexus of Revels. This is the one that cares about how many creatures you control, and it's got like 18 lines of text that make it get better for every creature you control.
Vigilance, then trample, then double strike.
Yeah. Kind of broken. But then there are other there is a kind of subcategory in this category of win condition commanders as well. And it's Voltron commanders.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense, right? Your commander is literally your win condition in this deck. Like, you want to deal 21 combat damage to each of your opponents, so that's the way you win. So, like, Rafik of the Many, Thronebreaker of Silence, like, that's how you're winning the game.
Exactly. It's very different as an approach to deck building, which we'll go into later.
Definitely.
In terms of, like, the difference between a, you know, Thromlock, whatever that Hellion was called, and versus a kind of Voltron-y commander.
Yeah.
But same kind of category.
Sure.
Next category is engine commanders. I love these commanders. But these are the commanders that usually produce some kind of card advantage. And in this case, card advantage might not refer to specifically card draw.
Yeah.
It could be recurring spells, or it could be just giving you an extra card from your graveyard every turn, or something like that, or access to your graveyard, or something like that. So, for example, Wilhelt. I like using Wilhelt as an example of an engine commander.
Definitely. This specifically draws you cards when you in your end step when you sack a zombie.
Yeah.
Sacking zombies makes you other zombies with Decayed.
It's just like this. It's not like the best zombie commander. There are other zombie commanders that you could run for that type that are like so strong, but Wilhelt provides this strong engine of I'm drawing an extra card a turn, and I will always produce an extra zombie. Like I can put something into the bin that's a non-decayed zombie, make a decayed zombie to up my zombie count.
It's doing a bunch of the things that you would want your zombie deck to do already, and it's just kind of churning through in that way. I would say these are closer to being an enhancer than a win con, because you tend to deploy these early because they're a thing that helps your deck to rocket along.
But sometimes you need to set some stuff up before you deploy them as well.
It's true. I think it varies a lot, where there's some engines that can be the first thing you deploy, but usually they want some sort of board state already. Like, you know, if you're talking about like a Marin deck, Marin is definitely an engine. This is the one that reanimates something in your end step for every experience counter you have, mana value cares about. So yeah, you sort of need to have creatures to sacrifice, or creatures you've milled or something
You
before
need to have
Marin.
a full bin.
You need to have something to do with Marin before you deploy it, but equally, you don't want to wait that long because you got to get experience counters by having your creatures die.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's this kind of middle ground. It almost needs to come in typically just before an enhancer, I would say.
Yeah, pretty
usually.
much. You're trying to set up advantage. In a commander game, typically, it's like set up advantage is the first step in a commander game. Enhancing that advantage is the second step, and then winning is the third step. That's like the 3-step process to winning a commander game, right?
Most of the time,
So these commanders are usually wanting to come out early, but usually you kind of have to weirdly set up something to make them good.
Yeah.
So like, for example, Muldrotha of the Gravetide. 6 mana Sultai commander that just lets you play a spell of each permanent type from the graveyard each turn.
Yep, another very similar to Marin, wants you to have stuff in your bin already before it gets good. Korvold Faker King.
Oh, that's a speedy engine. That's a V8 engine.
This is the when you sacrifice a permanent, you draw a card. So yeah, you typically want things to sacrifice. Treasures obviously being the absolutely busted thing in Korvold. But yeah, basically any sort of permanent that you're happy to sacrifice, then deploy Korvold, then your deck's rocketing along.
Yeah, I think that engine commanders are the ones I really attracted to, because it's like this advantage kind of. I like the word churning you used before. I think that's a really good use of, or kind of good encapsulation of what those commanders feel like. It's like this just grindy value kind of commander. Josh Lee Kwai plays these.
Yeah, they strike a good middle ground, I think, where there are commanders that are essential to your game plan, and we have spoken before about how we tend to try and avoid those because they feel so bad when your commander gets removed, and they're a lightning rod for removal. Engines are a bit of a lightning rod, but they also they can fly under the radar. It depends on the commander.
Depends
gets
how
removed.
good of an engine. Yeah,
It's
so
true.
like Will Helt is drawing you one extra card a turn and making you one body.
Yeah.
Whereas Korvold could draw you a lot of cards and then becomes a threat in the air as well. So like that's more of a lightning rod than Will Helt.
And similar to an enhancer, though, I think the really good thing about these commanders is that your deck tends to function totally fine without them. And that's the big thing about commanders that feel bad to get removed is like, does the deck do anything without them? And if the answer is no, those tend to be the real feels bad commanders to play where they get removed and you're like, okay, cool, my deck does nothing now.
Well, in a very opposite range of what you were just describing, the next category is a payoff commander.
Okay.
Now, payoff commanders smell like a win con, look like an enhancer, but they're not quite either. These commanders are probably just like the best card in your deck or one of the best cards in your deck and just so happen to sit in the command zone. It's kind of easier to define as if you could play your entire deck without casting your commander once, but if you do, you'll get a benefit out of it. That's kind of like how I define a payoff as a commander.
That makes sense to me. The deck of mine that's coming to mind for this is my Rith the Awakener deck.
Yeah, that's a great example, actually. Like, I've seen you play Rith and not cast Rith once because the token strategy is what you're focusing on.
Yeah.
And Rith is just like another way to make tokens.
Yeah.
And you've got access to it in the command zone.
And look, if the time is right, you deploy him, you make a bunch of tokens, that might be how you win the game. But the deck is a token deck, and there's been games where even though it could be good to have Rith out, there's a better spell in my hand that I'd rather have, or
probably 80% of the time there probably would be a better
good chunk
spell.
of the time. Like it's only when you really are looking at like, okay, if Rith swung this turn, I'd be making 30 tokens. That's might be when you bring Rith out. But yeah, they sort of enhance. Yeah, I see what you mean. They're sort of an enhancer, sort of a win con, but they're mostly just this payoff for the thing that the rest of your deck is trying to do.
Yeah, I think another good one to look at would be like Dogmeat Everloyal. This is the Naya commander from the Fallout precon. It has an ETB where you mill 5 cards, then return an aura or equipment card from graveyard to hand.
Yep.
That's like fine.
Yep.
Then
draw a card, basically.
Then there is the next line of text, which is whenever a creature you control that's equipped attacks, create a junk token. So that's kind of like a little payoff for playing a equipment, an aura deck, right? Like, if you want to cast your commander, great, and you'll get a little bit of benefit from Dogmeat giving you junk, which is you can sacrifice it to exile the top card, play it until end of next turn.
Yep.
But you don't need to. You're probably wanting to more prioritize the equipment and auras on the creatures, right? That's the whole play.
I think it's the kind of thing. This is probably the opposite of a glass cannon commander.
It's the exact opposite of a glass cannon.
This is the kind of commander where you could theoretically go your whole, if someone plays a turn 2 Draneth's Magistrate, which they shouldn't do, but if they did do that, you'd kind of, you wouldn't be thrilled, but you'd be like, I think I'll be fine. You might look around the table and go, I think of all of the decks here, mine is the most equipped to survive in this instance.
Yeah, because what I'm doing in my strategy is just like all in on that strategy, and the commander is just kind of give me a little bit of payoff. The one that I kind of thought of when I was like originally looking at this, and this popped up on the EDH Rack Top Commanders, was Quasar, Augur of Agonies.
This is the wheels thing that drains your opponents,
This
right?
is the Esper commander that says whenever you draw a card, target opponent loses a life and you gain a life.
Okay.
Now, I can kind of see an argument of this is a much more strong build around, but I still put it in the category of payoff because in the 99, you could also have Psychosis Crawler and all of that kind of stuff.
You could have your Underworld Dreams.
But your strategy is a wheels deck, right?
Yeah.
And your commander is paying you off for playing a wheels deck.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think about it.
I think all of these it's all nebulous, right? Like some of these will be, like I would put Quasar, I think I agree with you, in the payoff commander slot, but if there's like a Venn diagram of WinCon commanders, I think Quasar is very close to,
it's moving
in
closer
the
to that
overlap
scale, right?
towards the WinCon thing, but I would still put it in payoff. So it's, there's going to be like give and take, I think, in all of these things. Obviously, Eminence commanders are another really obvious example of payoff
that's a great
commanders.
example.
Any of these things like Aloro, Edgar Markov, Ur-Dragon, they tend to kind of enhance you. They're almost a bit like an engine, a lot of these in the early game, but then the thing that you bring them in for is the payoff.
Yeah, the little bit of a pay, and like you're getting a payoff in the command zone for being in the strategy, right?
Yeah.
Like Aloro gains you 2 life in your upkeep if it's in your command zone. So
Yeah,
if you're in
yeah.
a life gain strategy, it's just you're playing life gain strategy, and having it in your command zone is just a little bit of a payoff for playing that strategy.
Well, and interestingly, I think I would then put cards like the Eminence Commanders probably on the border with Engine. I think they kind of start fringing towards that part of the thing as well.
Yeah.
So it's all nebulous for sure.
Well, now we're moving into kind of more like out of the win cons, out of enhancers.
Sure.
We're moving into accelerator commanders now. This is the next category that I've defined. So these are the commanders that get you to the thing, whatever the thing is in your deck, quicker. And the thing could be anything. It could be casting a big spell. It could be putting counters on things. Could be literally anything that your deck strategy is trying to do, your archetype. Or it could just cheat on that thing altogether.
Right.
So these are commanders, the kind of examples that I'm thinking of for, like as a kind of give you an idea here. Narset Enlightened Master.
Oh, this is the OG Narset.
Original Narset.
When it attacks you look at the top 6 cards.
I think it's top 4.
Or reveal top 4, and then you can cast any number of non-creature spells from among them without paying their mana cost.
Correct.
So yeah, the whole goal of this commander is to get it out as fast as possible. Cheat on stuff.
Yeah,
cast things for free.
Cast as big spells as you want because you're casting them for free. Another example would be like Anima, Soul of the Elements.
Yep, makes all your creatures cost X less, where X is the number of counters on him.
Yep. Krenko Mob Boss is a very big accelerator in a goblin type deck.
Yep.
So
make more goblins, make more goblins, make more goblins. Yep. Makes sense.
Any tutor in the command zone kind of fills this category. So like Sisay in the command zone is an accelerator because it tutors specific cards. Instead of digging for them, you accelerate and cheat them out. Kellen, the new Boros Kellen from Eldraine.
Yep, has an adventure that goes and fetches an aura or equipment card from your graveyard, your library, put it into your hand.
So in a Sunforger deck, that is a real accelerator.
Sure, get Sunforger faster, and every time.
Every single time. It's basically like you get to put Sunforger in your command zone as well.
Makes sense.
So these commanders are just all about speed and getting you to do the thing as quickly as possible.
Makes sense.
Slightly different is enabling commanders.
Okay.
So different from accelerating commanders, enabling commanders basically allow you to play a strategy. It kind of unlocks a whole strategy because of how strong the supporting piece is in the command zone.
Right.
Now, I would say these are the closest to calling glass cannons as a category.
Right.
Because these are the kind of commanders that if they get removed, your strategy is so weak that it's basically unplayable.
So we're talking about like enabling like a strategy that just normally is unplayable, basically making it work. So like Arcadie's the strategist.
There you go. That's a perfect one.
So this takes like every creature that you control that has defender can attack as though it didn't have defender, and it deals combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So yeah, like an Arcadie's deck, you also when defenders enter the battlefield, you draw a card.
So it's also an engine, just because why not?
100%. But yeah, this turns, like you have like 3 mana, there's like that 1 white and a blue 0/8 defender with flying and shroud. This suddenly is a 3 mana 8/8 with shroud and flying that says draw a card when it enters the battlefield. Like,
and beats your face.
But notably, if Arcadie's is gone, the deck does nothing. Like you need Arcadie's before walls are at all playable in your deck. You might have a couple more of those sort of effects that say creatures you control with defender can attack, that kind of thing.
But because Arcadie's is in your command zone, it's enabling the whole strategy.
And you usually rely on that. Like you might have a couple of dependencies, like you other ways of making sure that you can attack or making sure your toughness is dealt instead of power, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But mostly, you're relying on the fact that you've got this card in your command zone that is the thing that unlocks every other card in your deck.
Yeah, a card that got printed in Lord of the Rings that I thought was like, oh, we needed a commander like this was Tom Bombadil for Sagas.
5-color Sagas deck, right? This is the one that lets you like move counters from Sagas or something like that.
It does something weird. It's like I can't actually remember the line of text on it now. It's whenever a chapter resolves, or whenever a saga resolves, the final chapter of a saga, you basically cascade into another saga or something like that.
Yeah, whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control resolves, reveal cards on the top of your library until you reveal a saga card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability triggers only once each turn.
Yeah, so it's like when you when you finish a saga, you get another saga.
One. Yeah.
I mean, look, there are other commanders that you could play for sagas
100%.
for sure. Like you could play
an Enchantress sort of strategy.
Enchantress strategy.
I know someone's planning on building Baba the Saga.
Yeah, that's cool.
Baba the
That
Saga.
was in our Discord.
Yeah, but using it as a way to sacrifice, sagas before you want to or before you need to, just to draw cards, drain your opponents.
Even just like Atraxa, the old proliferate commander, just
stuff.
like speed through the sagas a bit more.
Yep.
But yeah, I felt like Tom Bombadil was like, hey, this is now a strategy in Command Zone.
In a similar way, I feel as though Urtet, Remnant of Memnarch.
Yeah.
This really unlocked Mir in a way that there wasn't really a great Mir commander prior to. I guess you could play.
You could play Brutaclad.
Yeah, you could play Brutaclad. There was a Boros card that like deals damage, or you scry X, where X is the number of tapped creatures you control. Beginning of combat. I forget what that card's called.
Yeah, someone in our server, Adam.
Adam used to have a deck, but then, funnily enough, turned it into an Urtet deck. But yeah, before you were locked in Boros.
Abuelu?
Something like
Abelo?
that. I don't.
Something like that.
That rings a bell.
It's an A name, but yeah,
Yes, but
Urtet though says like, hey, I'm 5 color and I care about the creature type that you care about.
Yeah, it like straight up untaps all your Mir at the beginning of combat.
Puts a counter on them.
When you activate Wooburg, you can put a counter on all of them, untap them. Like there's like, it's very clearly designed like to be your Mir commander. And so yeah, like technically you'd call it an engine probably in terms of what it's doing for the deck, but it is the enabler in this deck because it's enabling a strategy that you probably would not be playing without this commander.
Yeah, exactly right. So that's the enabling commander.
That makes sense.
Final category is the toolbox commander.
Okay.
These are the do-it-all commanders. These are usually 3+ colors, is kind of like how I kind of identified them in the trends that was happening when I was scrolling through EDH Rec.
Sure.
And they are usually, they just do everything and anything. Sometimes they can look like a payoff. Maybe they could even look like a win con in some circumstances, but they usually are just able to do multiple things, and it's usually because their text box is like a short novella. They kind of, for me, they sit in this weird nebulous category of you could play a toolbox commander as long as it's generic enough as the commander for any of your decks.
No, this is sort of the Kenrith effect, right? Kenrith Returned King just has 5 lines of text on him. All of which are good. Like, nothing that is on that card is bad. So you could theoretically build a Kenrith life gain deck because you can pay 4 and a white or something like that to gain 5 life.
I think it's just 1 white, actually.
Yeah, there you go. But then there's a 4 and a black activated ability that says reanimate something. So you could play a reanimator strategy. There's a 3 and a blue effect that says draw a card. You could play a wheels deck in
It has
Kenrith.
a green activated ability, put counters on things. You want to play Voltron Kenrith and put counters on himself, you go for it.
Thankfully, I think they do this a lot less these days, especially like when they print 5 color commanders these days, they tend to try to make them cost 5 colors of mana. That's the big thing about Kenrith is you could build a mono white Kenrith deck straight up. You could just do that. You could have only white cards, only planes in the deck, only use the white activated ability, and there's no downside to doing that whatsoever. So it's good they don't do it so often. But yeah, I see what you call it. Toolbox. Like, he does everything. Anything you ever want.
And like, there are other commanders that are like sit in more specific strategies. For example, Dr. Madison Lee from the Fallout Precon.
This is the energy thing?
Yeah. So this is a toolbox commander because it has like 3 different activated abilities on it, but all of them require energy.
Sure. So you build an energy deck, but she does a lot of different things with the energy once you've got it.
She can draw a card. I think she makes a creature unblockable or something.
Something like that.
But there's multiple different things you can use it for. Yeah. Same with Breya, the original 4-color. Pay 2, sacrifice 2 artifacts, and then do one of any 20,000 things. You can either gain 5 life.
Gives a creature -4/-4 or something.
Yeah. It just does all the things. It does everything. You know what I mean? And when it enters, it makes you tokens as well. It's just, it does everything it needs to.
Even certain like Tudor sort of commanders can kind of accomplish this sort of toolbox effect. We talked about Sisay before. You could maybe put Sisay in toolbox, but certainly like a Zer the Enchanter list. Yeah. Like, you put it in Voltron as well. well. Like, you can definitely build it as this is the win con, but also in a pinch, it's like, okay, I'll grab my Oblivion Ring.
Yep.
Okay, I'll grab, this thing that gives hexproof. Okay, I'll grab this thing that, my Smothering Tithe. Oh, you can't grab Smothering Tithe.
No,
that's a good thing.
CMS.
But you can grab Rhystic Study. If
Yes.
you've got an empty hand. Like, there are so many things that Xur can do as a function of being a tutor in the command zone.
Well, I interviewed someone at Command Fest, and it's on our TikTok. It's like, I think I just posted it.
Least favorite colors to play against, and someone said Esper specifically because of Xur the Enchanter.
And specifically because of his friend's toolbox deck. He was playing, I think the guy that I interviewed had like a rat type deck.
Right.
And the Xur the Enchanter deck was just like, okay, I'll tutor up, what's the Plague? Engineered Plague? Which is that all creatures get -1/-1.
Ah, yuck.
And it's just like, oh, okay, cool. That's like the silver bullet to my deck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like these commanders are, the tutor commanders can kind of sit in this area, but these are the ones that just do it all, can do anything.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, as we've already been referring to, there are definitely commanders, and probably most commanders slide into multiple categories.
Yeah,
right?
like there were 7 different categories there, but as we were talking about them, we were saying there's win cons that are enhancers, there are enhancers that are engines, etc.
There are, payoffs that could look like win cons.
Yeah.
And I think that just to give you like a good look at what these kinds of things look like, Prosper Tomebound, this is an engine because at the end of every turn you exile a card and you can play it till the end of your next turn.
This is exactly the card advantage thing we were talking about. It's an engine.
And it's a payoff. Whenever you play a card from exile, you make a treasure token.
Yep.
So
it definitely does both of those things.
If you're playing an exile deck, then that's a payoff.
Yep.
Goshintai is an engine because you can sacrifice an enchantment to reanimate an enchantment, but it's also an accelerator because every time you cast a shrine, you make a shrine.
Yep. I think Joda the Unifier would be an example of this is just like 5-color good stuff these days. But it's an accelerator because it basically lets you cascade legendary things. It doesn't say cascade. It's basically cascade.
Cascade for legendaries.
Yeah, specifically. But then, it's also a win condition, right? Your creatures get +1/+1 for every color among permanents you control.
I think it actually just gets +X, where X is the number of legendaries.
Oh, you're totally right.
Yeah,
it's way better
than that. Yeah. If it could max out at 5, that would be great.
Yeah, but it's so much better.
It's so much better
like
than
I've got
that.
10 legendary things, everything's +10/+10.
I mean, I was looking at my Scarab God deck with this lens the other day, and that card is like everything in one. It's a payoff because I'm playing a zombie type deck and it pays me off from playing zombies.
Yeah, it drains your opponents in your upkeep.
Yeah, it's an engine because it gives me access to my graveyard and other people's graveyard, gives me a card advantage.
Also scries every upkeep.
It scries every upkeep, that's card advantage. It's an accelerator because I can cheat out Whopper threats from the graveyard for 4 mana, and it's a win condition because of that drain effect. Like if I just have the right board set up, cast Scarab God, lives to my upkeep, that's a win. You know what I mean? Like it's all of those things in one package. But I think identifying the different aspects of it that I like about it and what I'm building in mind with, that's going to help me build my deck in a way that leverages what I want to play about the deck more.
I see what you mean. So I'm feeling as though that might be a second half of the episode kind of thing.
I'm so glad you picked up the subtle transition attempt. So we're going to go to a break.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. We better take a thrifty interlude. So we've got lots left to cover, including building and piloting, as James alluded to already. But before that, we're going to hear a little something about a thrifty card. As is tradition, I will be performing, and this week, the card is brought to life in monologue form from the perspective of someone near the card.
Near the card?
Near the card. James, would you like to read the card we're featuring this week?
Is it me? Am I near the
you're
card?
nearby, right? Is this your card?
Is this your card? This week's thrifty interlude is Terror Tide. For 2 black and a black, you get a sorcery with... Fathomless Descent, one of the mechanics from Ixalan that has the word descent or descended or descend in, but this is the one that cares about the number of permanents in your graveyard. So Fathomless Descent, all creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanents in your graveyard.
And there it is, weary travelers, starboard side. Starboard side! Quickly now, you'll miss it, maggots! See now, that would be the sea of lost souls. Aha! See now, like the sea! That's rather good! But to be frank, you should not wish to see this sea. The lost and the drowned make this place their home, and they are eternally searching for more souls to claim. Their cohort shall ever grow larger than our own, as though the numbers of the living are always swelling like the high tide, we may never exceed the numbers of the dead. Anyway, no swimming for the next 4 leagues, or I'll see that you're left behind. I'll be risking no sailors on your folly. Wait. See that you're left behind in the sea? Your captain's on fire today, men. Hey, quiet down. It's not at all like the time I fell asleep with my leg on the stern cannon. It's figurative. Get budgeted.
Is that the same guy from Port of Carfell?
100%.
It is the same guy? That's funny.
He even said in there it is wearing travelers. Same as that guy.
I clocked onto that pretty quick. The second I heard the pirate accent, I was like, hang on.
That guy's part of the Thrifty universe in multiple entries now.
And now he's also a planeswalker.
Yeah, he's been on Ixalan.
He's been on Kaldheim and Ixalan now.
Ixalan.
So surely his home plane is Ixalan. And he ended up on Kaldheim through an omen path in the sea or something like that.
In my head, his ship is like the Treasure Planet ship. And it can just do that.
Kind of boop.
Yep, just flies around, teleports, whatever.
Yeah.
It's sci-fi ship.
That makes sense.
Thrifty Thursdays happens every week in our Discord server and on Substack, like we mentioned at the top of this episode. So if you're in the Discord server, though, you can check out the dedicated channel, play some games, or get some advice on your latest deck.
Yeah, the Discord server's been really awesome recently. I actually just sent a message in the server
I saw this
morning or last night or something. I said, guys, it's getting really hard to keep up to date with everything because you're sending so much.
I'm with you though. I used to read every single message, and it's gotten to a point now, especially the deck discussions channel. It's great. You guys are giving great advice, pointing towards our resources we've given before, the template, all that kind of stuff. It's been awesome seeing what people do, but sometimes I log on and there's like 50 messages and deck discussions, and I'm like, I'll just get up to date on general today.
Yeah, I'm sure all the advice was sound. I trust our listeners. But we should get back into commander roles. Well, we're not into roles anymore. We've identified all the roles.
Sure, but the other thing the Space Commanders wanted was to think about how we're building and playing our deck depending on what our commander role is.
Yeah, so now that we have all of these kind of like categories in our heads, we can approach the deck building process and piloting with that in mind, and it should help us a lot. And I've found that it, applying this kind of lens, as it were, to deck building has really helped. So let's start with deck building.
Yeah,
let's
sure.
start there.
I mean, I think the thing that immediately pops into my head is sort of probably the last time we really spoke about this, which was Mana Curvy.
That was episode 25 for those that haven't been around with us for a long time.
A long time ago now. But yes, we were talking about mana curves and how you build a mana curve, and specifically the relationship with ramp. That was the introduction to Sam Black's line of reasoning when it came to ramp. Of
Hallowed
course.
be thy name.
Hallowed be thy name. So yeah, we were talking about specifically what turn do you want your commander to come out. That was the big thing we were looking at in that episode.
Now, I think, obviously, this lens is now going to help us really identify this or answer this question a lot easier.
Now that we know what role our commander plays, we know when they probably need to come out. So, I mean, we recently, probably your Sally Sparrow deck is the most recent example of a deck you've built, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, probably between the two of us, is probably the most recent deck that's been built and put together.
I haven't really done anything else. Yeah.
So my Sally Sparrow deck, my Sally Sparrow commander is a 4 CMC commander, and I would give her the role of possibly enabler/engine.
Sure.
She enables this flash creature strategy.
Yep, and then she also, when creatures you control leave the battlefield, she creates clue tokens. So notably, you want to get her out early to give your creatures flash, but also really crucially for that clue making ability, right?
To get card advantage.
Yeah, you kind of don't want to flicker stuff before Sally Sparrow comes out, because then you're not getting clues and you sort of feel like you're missing out on that part of her line of text.
Yeah, and the whole deck is built around her as well. So I guess she could, enabler feels right for her. Like if she's not on the battlefield, my deck is not doing what it wants to do.
Makes sense.
So Sally Sparrow is a 4-drop. So naturally, I've included every 2-drop ramp spell I can possibly do in those colors. Every 2 mana rock I can run is basically in the deck.
Yep.
Because if on turn 2 I cast a 2 mana ramp spell.
Yep. If you have a Mind Stone, if you cast your Arcane Signet,
Cold
anything.
Steel Heart.
Yeah, any 2 mana.
Star Compass. Any of them.
Assuming that on turn 3 you then play a land, that means you have 4 mana on turn 3. You'll be casting Sally Sparrow a turn earlier than you otherwise would, right?
And then on turn 4, I'm really starting to play into my strategy and build that engine. So So my enabler comes down early and enables me to start building out the engine that is in the deck.
Yep.
So that's like, with the lens of seeing Sally Sparrow as an enabler, I was like, okay, she needs to come out as quickly as possible. I was originally running like 4 mana rocks in this deck when I originally built it. And then you actually pointed it out. You were like, hey, dude, there's probably more 2 mana rocks you could run to get her out a turn earlier. And I was like, yeah, actually, it would be way better if every single game I played, she was always out on turn 3.
Yeah, I think with the number of rocks you have, probably 85, maybe 90% of the time she's coming out early. And that seems right for that deck. Like, it's pretty rare that you wouldn't want that to happen. But yeah, this obviously contrasts a lot with like a win condition commander. You know, someone like Jetmere Nexus of Revels, which we talked about, is only 4 mana, but doesn't really do anything until you have a bunch of other creatures.
Yeah, casting Jetmere first
Bad.
does nothing.
Bad
He's
idea.
just a 3/4 that does nothing.
Actually, no lines of text whatsoever on him that are relevant at all. But yeah, after turn 6 or even maybe turn 8, really, with a Jetmere deck, that's when we're going to want to bring Jetmere in. That might even win us the game. But yeah, we've got to think about, okay, like if I'm not needing to ramp into Jetmere, what else am I going to be doing? And what does the rest of my curve need to do? And it basically is the opposite of this, right? We want to progress the board. We want to get the board ready for when Jetmere comes out. So yeah, you could probably play a less ramp-heavy Jetmere deck, and that would be totally fine.
Yeah, and I think as well is if you're now thinking about, right, what do I fill that part of my mana curve out with?
Yeah.
Is board progression stuff. So you can even run stuff that is just really cheap but makes a lot of bodies. So I'm thinking like silly cards like Resolute Reinforcements.
Yeah.
Just a 2 mana spell that makes 2 bodies.
Yep. You could be running Sprout Swarm. You could be
Krenko's
on
Commands.
Sky Knight Vanguard is the one that attacks and makes a 1/1 human. That's tapped and attacking.
All the various red goblin make 3 goblin spells you can run.
You could be on
See how many you can list off the top of your goblin mind. This is like asking someone to name a film.
Dragon Fodder.
Dragon Fodder. You got one.
I got one.
But there is tons of them. And like you can just fill your low curve out. So that way, in a very similar way that I'm doing with my Sally Sparrow deck, is I'm turning on this game plan by casting my commander early. By casting your creature development early in a Jetmere deck, you've turned on the plan.
Yeah.
Like, you've enabled this to happen. It's weird. Like, talking about a win condition commander in the kind of same lens as an enabler, but filling your curve out with different things at the low end.
Well, it's kind of talking about consistency at this point. It's like, we said, I reckon 85% of the time, Sally Sparrow comes out early. In the same way, in Jetmere, on turn 2 or 3, I would say 85 to 90% of the time, you would want to have a spell that is either making you a body or is going to make you some bodies later.
I would argue by like turn 5 in a Jetmere deck, I want pretty close to the magic number of maybe 7-8 creatures on board.
I'd say so. In
Maybe
your perfect
more.
world, that's probably what you should be shooting for. So yeah, you need your token makers to come down in those super early turns, probably turns 2 or 3 realistically.
Yeah.
And you could maybe afford to go, maybe only a 5 or 6 ramp spell deck if you're going to be doing that.
At the complete opposite end of that spectrum, though, I think accelerator commanders that like really, these are like the Narsets that we were talking about. These ones that cheat on costs or really push us to the thing really quickly.
Yeah, Arcades is another example. He's going to
sitting
draw
in
us
that
cards
enabling section.
after we play the defenders. We're going to draw cards, so the sooner that Arcades comes out, the better.
Yeah, so like accelerators and enablers, I think, are the ones that you want to get quickly as possible. So you do want a lot of ramp in these decks. And also, the thing about accelerators specifically, like I'm thinking about Narset here, like it is a lightning rod for removal.
Yeah.
These really hardcore accelerators, and even the enablers like Arcades, Arcades, if it gets removed, your entire strategy is turned off.
You tend to just spend the next turn casting Arcades again, a good chunk of the time.
So we want a lot of ramp because we're probably going to need to cast our commander 2, maybe 3 times in a game to make sure our strategy is online. Like Narset is going to be filled with big spells as well. So we need to support the big spells thing by adding a lot of ramp, because then if we don't have our commander, we at least might be able to cast at least one of those big spells with the amount of ramp that we have put in the deck.
Look, it's complicated, and as you'll see now, like there's multiple things going on here, but really you can simplify a lot of this ramp stuff, a lot of this mana curve stuff down to, okay, if I draw my perfect opening hand in this deck, what does it look like? What turn does my commander come out? What do I do before my commander comes out? What do I do after my commander comes out? And it'll let you do that because, knowing that Narset is your win con and your accelerator means that every piece of ramp is relevant, and certainly the 2-mana ramp to get her out early. And as you say, like you can think of Narset as maybe your 4-mana and 6-mana spell in your opening hand because she almost certainly will get removed.
Yeah.
Oh, she's got bloody hexproof.
It's also, she is 6 mana.
She is 6?
Yeah, it's 3 and then Jeskai.
So you probably want 2-mana ramp and also some amount of 3 and 4-mana ramp too, right?
Yeah, maybe like a Worn Power Stone.
Worn Power Stone would be good
like
here.
that.
Even a Hedron Archive might be relevant.
But I think, in those decks, especially because, those mana rocks are non-creatures, so you can cast them from the top. That's good synergy. That's a good pick for her.
That's true.
But like, I'm now thinking about, okay, let's jump into a different category, payoff commanders. When I'm thinking about what turn my payoff commander wants to come out, I'm not actually thinking I want it to come out. I'm thinking if I get it out, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I really need to look at my 99 to see what kind of ramp and when I want to cast these crucial spells.
Yeah.
Like, is there a 5-drop slot of cards? Like, is there 5 mana spells that are crucial to my strategy? I now need to think, okay, ramp on turn 2 or 3 to make sure I can cast these 5 drops on turn 3 or 4.
Yeah.
1 turn early. So that way I'm thinking, okay, if I cast my commander, that's great, but these 5 mana spells, these 5 mana spells, these are the ones that I want out. You know what I mean?
Well, when I was building my Wrath of the Awakener deck, which I would definitely put in this payoff camp, I mean, I did there's a lot of ramp in that deck because Wrath costs a lot of mana and has an expensive, you have to pay for the activated ability. 2 and a green as well. And you typically want to do other things on that turn besides pay 2 and a green. So there's a lot of ramp in that deck, but a lot of the ramp is also just supporting the fact that, it's pretty hard. Like
You've just got big token makers.
A lot of the really consistent and repeatable token makers, just in Magic in general, tend to cost 4 mana or more.
Well, like I'm thinking of like cards like Avenger of Zendikar.
That's a good one.
Thinking of Sprout Swarm as well.
Sprout Swarm, even if you typically want to cast that with buybacks, so that costs a bit more. Rabble Rousing is a really great example. 4 and a white, it's an enchantment that makes basically tokens every time you attack.
Yep.
But in order to support that, you're going to need some ramp for it. And so even if you're not thinking explicitly about the role your commander plays, knowing your commander is less essential means you can plan for the rest of your curve, as you say, the 99.
Yeah, I think obviously mana curves and ramp is a very crucial thing, but we referenced that in Mana Curvy. Go listen to that episode. It's yonks ago. But there are other things that our deck needs to do that I think having the lens of what role our commander plays will help us a lot. Like card draw, for example. Every deck needs card draw. We've done a whole last episode on card draw.
Yep.
But with the lens of our commander's role in the deck, I'm thinking about what is my commander doing for me? And I'm thinking about engine commanders specifically, the ones that give us card advantage in some way.
Sure.
I always ask myself when I've got an engine commander of how much card advantage is this really giving me? And when I say really giving me, I'm like, for example, if I've got a Shurikai Genesis engine in my command zone.
This is the one that activates for 2 generic mana, you tap it, draw 2 cards, discard a card.
That's giving me 2 extra cards every turn.
Yeah.
I'm going, I discard 1, but like for no cost out of my hand, I'm getting repeatable card advantage.
And you are going up in cards every single time you do that. Yeah.
Every turn I'm going up 1 card at least with just having Shurikai in my command zone. But there are other commanders, like for example, Scarab God, that could kind of be considered an engine because they're scrying me. But we always say scrying is not
it's
not a card. It's like half a card.
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking about scrying with Scarab God, I'm like, okay, that's not drawing me a card, and I still need to cast cards and hit the big one is hitting my land drops.
Yeah,
that's a huge one.
It's a really big thing. It's a way you can evaluate a lot of card draw. And I think we even spoke about that when we did the deck principle card draw episode. We evaluated all the different ways you can put cards in your hand or in your graveyard, surveilling, all of that stuff. But the big thing was, does this let you hit your land drops? Because for instance, my Merrin deck, I would call Merrin an engine commander.
Yeah.
Because she just does things for you every turn.
She gives you card advantage from the graveyard.
Yeah. But I'm reaching for Merrin a lot less at the moment. And it's because at a time I put a pretty much only mill in Merrin because I was like, look, my graveyard is my hand. I'm getting something back every turn, which is true.
Yeah.
But you still want to do stuff with your mana. And crucially, milling never lets you hit your land drops unless you've got Ramming Up Excavator or something. But most of the time, milling does not draw you a card. It does not put a card in your hand, does not put a land into your hand to play it as your land for the turn. So, I think I'm currently at about 7 pieces of actual card draw in Merrin.
Probably needs to go up, right?
It needs to be like, I don't think it needs to be a 15, like we normally have.
It needs to be a 10.
It needs to be a 10, at least. Currently I'm finding the consistency is all over the place because, even milling, it's just like blindly putting cards in. Sometimes you hit your Sakura Tribe Elder and you go, cool, my land drop is set for the next 10 turns. But sometimes you hit lands and it's like, cool, I needed those in my hands.
Because now I'm stuck on 4 lands. I've only cast Merrin and now I can't cast this really important 5-drop, which will let me get experience counters and be a big creature to support my strategy.
So it's important. You need to keep these things in mind. So you said it's not a 15. Well, we said it's not a 15 card draw deck. I agree with that, but I agree it's a 10. It still needs the ability to put cards in your hand.
I think people sometimes. It's one of these things of you can be in danger of overcompensating or undercompensating with these, kind of overcorrecting yourself, being like thinking, I've got an engine commander. I don't need as much card draw in this deck.
Yeah.
And then you run the risk of running basically nothing and your commander is your only source of card advantage.
Well, and now you've turned it into a lightning rod. This is the same problem that we have with other types of commanders like we spoke about, like the wing cons, like the enhancers. These are the commanders that are likely to be removed all the time because people can see it's the only way you're drawing cards.
Yeah, if Shurikai is the only card draw that you have been activating all game.
Or Korvold. You know, if someone's like, I see you've got 10 treasures there, remove Korvold before you can sacrifice. I mean, you can't do that. It's the stupid thing about Korvold. But you get what I mean. If people can see the only way you're drawing cards is with Korvold, they will remove Korvold.
Yeah, I think that card draw is a really interesting one. And there are other commanders that immediately tell you, hey, you need to put more card draw in me because I'm not an engine.
Yes.
So like, for example, a payoff commander, a commander that supports you doing your strategy, it's not helping you with card advantage in any way, shape, or form. So that's kind of where we go, okay, well, is this a 10 or is this a 15 card draw deck?
And sometimes it might be more than that, right?
Yeah.
Like if you desperately need cards in your hand, like, my Estrid the Mask deck is an Enchantress deck, and basically the only way to draw cards in that deck is Enchantress effects, cards that say when you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card. I am so high on those specific types of cards in that deck because without them, I just run out of things to do because Estrid untaps all your enchanted permanents.
So you get a lot of mana.
You get a lot of mana.
She's an engine in and of herself, though,
absolutely.
as well. Like a mana advantage engine.
Definitely. But not one that gives you access to any extra cards.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes you have the opposite thing with card draw, right? Where you go, like, I get so much mana in this deck, I actually need to keep my hand even more full than I would normally do. This is a deck that needs 20 pieces of card draw.
Because I empty my hand all the time.
Yeah, 25 even. Because I need to have something to do with all this mana that I have.
I will say I've never seen your Estrid deck struggle with cards in hand, though. Because you have got such a strong focus.
Yeah.
There are so many Enchantress effects.
Yeah.
I've never seen you with an empty hand.
It's pretty rare these days.
Yeah.
I think early days there was 1 or 2 games where it happened and I was like, man, I've got to have this never happen again.
Those are rookie numbers, man. Got to pump those numbers right up.
Right.
Look, well, I think obviously every deck needs win conditions, and we just talked about enhancers and win conditions recently in episode 97 a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
But enhancers and win conditions are really important to think about with this lens of what's my role of my commander, because of course it's a really delicate balance, especially when your commander is either a enhancer or a win condition. You need to balance them. So for example, for enhancers, obviously, yes, one of our commander could be an enhancer, like Yarok, the Desecrated is Panharmonicon in the command zone.
Yep.
So now you've got to ask yourself the question of, do you need Panharmonicon in the 99 of your deck?
It's a really delicate balance here where it's like, I mean, I've had basically this same problem. We've maybe even spoken about this on the podcast before. My Gandalf the White deck, I've been hesitating to put Panharmonicon in the deck because in that deck, Gandalf is my Panharmonicon with extra effects because it also leaves the battlefield effects. And it is tricky to know.
Yep.
Like, if I always have access to this enhancer, is that enough? How good is it to have multiple enhancers at the same time? That's going to be a big one. Is it like, okay, if I have Yarok and I have Panharmonicon, I'm winning that game. You probably should have Panharmonicon in that deck. But if it's feels instead like it's win more. Like, put Panharmonicon on the battlefield and now it's like, oh, I guess I'm doing things slightly more, but that's just a wasted card. Then you don't need Panharmonicon in that deck.
But you also got to think of like, you can run into the danger of like, okay, if I go, yes, if I will win the game if I have Panharmonicon and Yarok in the deck. So therefore, I should put more versions of Panharmonicon in my deck.
Yeah.
Then you run too much. And then it's like you might get into a game and you've got 5 extra enhancers in your Yarok deck.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, now I'm not doing anything with these enhancers.
We see this all the time, I think, in token lists. I see people playing every single Anointed Procession doubling season effect that they can get their hands on. And there is a point of diminishing returns where it's like, yes, now if you made a token copy of something, you'd make 8, but where are your token makers? They're not here.
I'll tell you where it's really, really common. In mono red burn decks.
Yeah.
Damage doublers, damage triplers.
Yep.
Like, there are so many. It's the Dominus, the red Dominus that doubles damage, is it?
Ooh,
I can't remember.
know.
There's a bunch of red commands. Like Torbrand does a similar thing.
Of the Twin Gods doubles your things.
Fiery Emancipation.
Yeah.
So, but like, there are so many
Furnace
of these.
of Wrath. Yeah.
That sit in the command zone now, right?
Yes,
They're
true.
like commanders that do this. I'm enhancing your damage.
Yep.
But if you run all of the red double damage, triple damage, quadruple damage, quintuple damage, it's 2024. It could happen. Like if you run all of those, you run out of burn spells to make use of them.
Yeah.
I was in a game just the other week with someone who had like 4 damage doublers on the battlefield, but they're mono red. Their hand was empty. They were living off the will of the top of their library.
Yeah.
And I'm like, at that point, you probably are losing. So that's kind of where you're like, okay, down on enhancers because my commander's already an enhancer, and maybe up on card draw.
Yeah, or up on some other stuff. I mean, look, I think that certainly all that is the case if your commander is that enhancer commander like we were talking about. But in the inverse of this, probably, if your commander is like an engine, for example, with a card draw sort of engine happening, then now cards like Teferi's Ageless Insight, which I do think you should be cautious about including in decks because you need to already be drawing cards before they're good. But if your commander draws cards...
Like if you're Shurikai Genesis Engine...
100% you should be on Teferi's Ageless Insight. I mean, it depends on the power level. People build Shurikai really strong. Yeah. But if you are specifically like a wheeling kind of Shurikai deck... Teferi's Ageless Insight will be so good in that deck because you always draw cards with your commander.
I think the other really tricky thing here is it's the balance, right? And we talked about it in episode 97 when we talked about enhancers and win conditions, but now we're adding this extra lens of the commander being part of that conversation. It's just a delicate balance. And I think that with enhancers like this, you need to think, okay, Teferi's Ageless Insight, busted, really, really strong. If I run more of these, like now Hammer Its Archive and something else on top of this, what am I taking out and what am I losing in the deck to put these in? Because I could be running a Psychosis Crawler, and that could potentially be a win condition in my card draw matters deck.
Yeah, it's a real balance for sure. But there'll be times where Teferi's Ageless Insight is a card draw. You can tag that card draw in your Mox field list because it's what it does, because your commander's going to draw cards that consistently. Yeah. But then, there are other times where, it's opportunity cost, right, is what we talk about.
What are you losing out?
What are you losing out? It's very hard to quantify in your head, but there are cards that are not being included whenever you include any card in your deck. And I think
we're limited to 100 cards.
Yeah, and so Psychosis Crawler, if that needs to make its way in, maybe it is a card like Teferi's Ageless Insight that doesn't make the cut. But it'll really depend on what your commander is doing. And I think engine commander specifically, enhancers will make a lot better.
Because and you got to think about how strong your engine is in the command zone as well. Yeah. Like for example, Will Help the Rock Cleaver, I wouldn't put a Teferi's Ageless Insight in that deck because it's only drawing me 1 card every turn. Yeah. And doubling that to 2 for 4 mana doesn't feel as good as like Shurikai, where it's drawing me 2 cards a turn. And if I can untap Shurikai, it's drawing me more than that. Yeah. Then Teferi's Ageless Insight is absolutely busted.
Well,
right?
or for instance, my Azor the Lawbringer deck, which does the Sphinx's Revelation thing, right?
Yeah.
You pay X mana, white, blue, blue, draw X cards, gain X life. Teferi's Ageless Insight is so good in that deck because it's like
crazy good in that
deck. Pay 6 mana to draw 3 cards. No, 6 mana, draw 6 cards. That is game-breakingly good.
Well, it's so good you're running 2 versions of the effect with Alhammer Its Archive.
Yes,
of doubling up this card. card draw.
Yeah, big
It's
time.
interesting. I think enhancers are just a absolute balancing act.
It's really tough. If you haven't listened to episode 97, because it's complicated, like we're not going to give you all of the advice we possibly can. Definitely go listen to episode 97 because it was really tricky to quantify. And even in our own decks, right? We were tagging enhancers differently. We were counting enhancers differently. It's complex and it depends on a lot of different things.
Really nebulous. But win conditions is another part of our deck building that we need to focus on. Obviously, again, we had a whole category of commander, the role of win condition commanders that can fill this role. However, I think if you approach your commander with like, oh, my commander is my win condition, you again run this danger of actually undercompensating and kind of under-representing a win condition in the 99 of your deck.
Yeah, I mean, even if you have Jetmir Nexus of Revels in the command zone, yes, that is likely to be your win con probably 80% of the time.
Yep.
You need something else, even if it's just another overrun effect. Maybe it's an overwhelming stampede.
But you only need one or two other versions of it, right?
Yeah,
probably
maybe even just one.
Just one, because,
Yeah.
and I think this is the thing of like our usual recommendations for win cons are like 2 to 5.
Yeah.
Whereas if your commander is a win con, my recommendation is probably 1 to 2.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Genuine, because you've always got access to your commander, but I also think an alternative win condition is important to think about because if someone figures out what your commander's trying to do, let's say your commander has an activated ability for a win condition and somehow your opponent turns off activated abilities with like a Drana and Limvala or something like that. You've got a horrible play group. They're playing stacks against you. You need to now think of a way of winning that game without your win condition commander.
Yeah, you will need to find an alternate strategy here. I mean, I think if I was in a Jetmir deck, maybe rather than play an overwhelming Stampede, I might play a Kyren Negotiations. This is the one that you tap an untapped creature you control, deal 1 damage to any target.
That's rigged because your whole strategy is you're trying to flood the board with tokens.
Usually its win is combat damage with Jetmir. But yeah, if someone has an ability to recur, a Spore Frog loop happening, you may just need an other way of winning that game.
Current Negotiations is a great shout as an alternative win con in a go-wide deck.
I think specifically because people will find solutions to combat damage if you make it clear that's your only way of winning.
Yeah.
And so, you're just having a different sort of route to go down. A similar one, but a different one.
Yeah, but like instead of swinging with these creatures, you're now tapping them to ping a damage directly at your
harder to
opponent's
deal
face.
with by a long shot. Yeah, definitely.
I think toolbox commanders in relation to win conditions are really interesting because toolbox commanders do so much in the deck. Sometimes they lack strategic direction in the deck building process. So I think it's less about the win condition cards that I'm worried about, is making sure that when you're building around a toolbox commander, you are building to a win condition of some kind. Like if you're building a Kenrith deck, great. What does your winning board state look like before you cast your Overwhelming Stampede or before you cast your Mass Mill spell, for example?
When I was playing my Sisay deck, the Sisay that shooters for Wooburg, I had a Shrines list specifically. And it was really important to me. Like, I had toolbox removal, I had protection pieces.
You had some stacks pieces in there?
Yes, there was some soft stacks pieces in there that I could fetch. There was Kuranos, for instance, turns off kind of death triggers and that kind of thing. That was all definitely a thing I could do, but I was also really aware that the goal of the deck was to get Sanctum of All and explicitly the Sanctum of Stone Fangs, the black shrine that drains your opponents. Because it's like, that's actually how the game comes to an end.
Yeah.
And I think specifically, certainly if you're playing a tutor in the command zone, know what you need to tutor for at any given moment. It's a deck you'll probably need to practice a lot more before you first bring it out, or you should, I think.
Like Dr. Madison Lee, for example, the energy commander. It's like you can do all the energy stuff.
Yes.
Fantastic. You've got a toolbox. It can draw you cards when you make energy. It can make creature unblockable. What is the board state that wins you the game with Dr. Madison Lee in the command zone?
Yeah.
What are you building towards? Because you'll use Dr. Madison Lee as a toolbox to fix your board state, to fix your cards, to do all this. You can think about your commander like an actual toolbox. It's going to repair the parts of your deck that aren't working at the time, but what are you building?
Yeah.
What are you building towards? With that hammer and spanner in your commander, what are you building?
It's really important with toolbox commanders because they're very good at spinning the wheels. I would say, like, you are going to draw cards. You are going to get incremental advantage through playing a toolbox commander. But as you say, what's the board state that wins you the game? And it's almost, funnily enough, I mean, we're going to talk about piloting in a sec, but it's more of a piloting thing, I almost feel, where it's like,
it is.
actually know, when you are digging through your deck and drawing cards, what are you digging for? What's the thing that turns this 20 energy that you have into, like Gonti's Aether Heart? Is that the card?
Oh, extra turn.
So you pay like 10 energy, take an extra turn. Is that your way of winning the game? Is that what you're digging for when you're drawing cards? And if so, is there a better way to draw cards? Like things will change when okay, this is the win con I'm going for.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the toolbox one was the tricky one that I wanted to highlight. Because
Yeah.
I feel like people often don't think about, they go like, oh, I'm playing Kenrith, I'll win. I can do everything. It's like, well, you win by getting a board state and deploying a win con.
Yes.
What does that look like for you?
And what's the actual win con? Like, if we're still talking about deck building, what are the actual cards that bring the game to an end? And how many are there? Because, the toolbox will be very good at covering a lot of your other bases. Kenrith can draw you cards. Kenrith can gain you life to keep you alive.
Reanimate pieces.
Kenrith can bring stuff back. Like, you've got so many things covered. You typically, it depends, but typically in a toolbox commander, you don't have the win con sorted out. So if anything, they might be more important than they usually are.
It might be a 5 win con kind of deck.
Because you might have so much of the rest of the deck covered that you can afford to include 5 win cons.
Another type of commander that I think is a little bit of a cautionary tale is payoff commanders. Because I even made the joke of it smells like an enhancer, it looks like a win con. When you're thinking about putting win cons in these decks, you need to think about, is the payoff of your commander strong enough to also be a win con? Is it crossing that border from payoff to win condition? Like Quasar, for example, the one that I referenced before about whenever you draw a card,
you drain an opponent for 1 life, you gain a life.
That's pretty good, but is it going to be enough to kill a whole play group of commander players? Probably not, because it's targeted. However, if you make sure you're running a card like Psychosis Crawler and maybe a Peer into the Abyss,
draw half your library,
that would pretty much end the game. I think I would label Peer into the Abyss as a win condition in my Quasar deck.
Because in conjunction with your commander, that's the winning condition.
And in conjunction with my commander and Psychosis Crawler, that will 100% get me there. Peer into the Abyss plus Quasar might not win me the game on its own, but Peer into the Abyss plus Quasar plus Psychosis Crawler, that'll 100% do it. Even take just Psychosis Crawler and Peer into the Abyss. That will do it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in my payoff commander, Wrath the Awakened, like we were talking about, I run a lot of I think pretty much, I don't have Perforos, but I have Impact Tremors, and I have the 3-mana commander that I'm blanking on that also does Impact Tremors. I don't remember what it's from.
3-mana commander?
No, 3-mana creature, 2 and a red, and it has Impact Tremors text on it. Creature enters the battlefield under your control. It's from Yucapana. Anyway, I forget what it's called.
You could also run a Gate Instigator in there now as well, the Offspring one.
I did think
cool.
about that. I did think about that. But yeah, these are so much better because my commander makes so many tokens in one go. There is board states where just that and Wrath is a win con, right? If there are 30 of a certain color of creature on the battlefield, I can make 30 Saprolings. The highest opponent's at 30 life. It's cool. Impact Tremors wins the game right now.
It's just winning me the game.
Yeah. So definitely think about your win cons in relation to the payoffs. Yeah, I agree.
All right, finally, on to piloting.
Yes.
Finally. I think this is going to be a quick section because piloting, most of the time, this is kind of weirdly playtesting. In games, we're going to be taking notes of things that aren't working so we can jot down and then come back to it and fix it. So now we have this lens of, right, we know what the role of our commander is. We know why we built this deck with specific ramp, with specific card draw, with specific enhancers and win conditions. How do we play it to leverage this the most?
Yeah, this is what the Space Commanders were talking about. I think definitely one thing we're going to want to know about, we know what a curve is, right? That was the one thing we looked at, how we built our curve when our commander comes out. You got to learn how to mulligan, right? You got to know how to mulligan for specifically what you want your curve to look like.
Yeah, I think you should be looking at your opening hand like we were looking at putting ramp in. Is this the ramp I want to have in my opening hand?
Yeah, does this deploy the board state that I know will allow my commander to make the best use of itself?
Yeah, or is this in my Jetmare deck, is this, have I got all the body makers?
Yeah.
Have I got body makers in my opening hand? If so, fantastic, I'm going to keep it. Or if I'm looking at, maybe I draw my opening hand and it's got the, what's that, tap a creature, ping a damage?
Oh, Current Negotiations.
Maybe that's in my opening hand. I'm like, well, That actually does nothing on an empty board
Yeah,
state.
this is
Maybe I
blank right
mulligan
now.
that away.
Yeah. And it's the kind of thing where you'll know, you really got to do, I mean, this is the thing that comes up all the time with mulligans, but really think, okay, I'm not drawing any more cards. What does this hand actually do right now?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if it's a 2-mana, you're a deck, you always wants to ramp on turn 2, you've got a 2-mana ramp spell in there, great. But what does the rest of the hand look like? Is it 3 more lands? Because that's probably not going to get you there.
But now also think about what your commander's doing for you. So, for example, my Sally Sparrow deck, I could see a 2-mana ramp spell to get Sally out, and I can then see a creature that I can flicker. I'm like, fantastic. Now I'm getting Sally out and creating card advantage.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect hand for me to keep. A 2-drop ramp spell, a creature that I can flash in on the following turn, and a way to flicker it to give me card advantage.
That's absolute dream scenario for that deck.
It's honestly, and now that I built Sally with this lens in mind of like what it's doing for me in the deck, and it functions so much better than so many of my other decks because I built with this lens of like, what is Sally doing for me? And I think I pilot it so much better because of what I'm thinking specifically, what does Sally do for me? And how have I built this deck because of that?
Yeah.
What does my opening hand look like? Is it supporting that strategy?
Yeah. Does it get Sally Sparrow out as soon as possible? Does it have a creature I can flash in? Does it have flicker spells? Big time. And probably in that order too.
Yeah, it is literally step 1, step 2, step 3.
And probably in priority order, right? Or maybe the creatures are more important than the ramp sometimes, but it depends.
Sometimes.
It depends. Teaching mulliganing is really hard.
There's probably a whole command coming for mulliganing.
Almost certainly.
Eventually.
But yeah, you definitely should keep your commander's role in mind because equally there are the inverse of this, right? Of going, I need my commander to come out late. What does my commander need to have ready for me already?
Yeah.
Does this hand get me that board state? The Jetmir sort of thing that we were talking about.
And then I think as well, like the other thing you got to keep in mind while you're piloting is you could be on turn 6 in the game and a board wipe happens. You now need to assess, is it worth recasting your commander now? Because now we know what the role of our commander is. Is like recasting Jetmir after a board wipe is like casting it on turn 2, turn 3. It's pointless. You could you could throw all the fast mana in your deck that you want.
Yeah.
Casting Jetmir on an empty board is bad.
Well, we also know, like increasingly, and especially like we've looked at the stats on this, there will very likely be multiple board wipes cast in a game.
Yeah.
Every time you cast your commander when you don't need to is just increasing the likelihood that you then have to cast it again for even more mana later in the game. So yeah, you might as well save yourself the commander tax and go, okay, what do I actually really need to do to set up here?
Yeah.
Is it actually worth having my commander right now? There are a lot of commanders, whether they're enhancers, whether they're win cons, whether they're payoffs, that really don't want to come out immediately after a board wipe. They'd much rather be 1 to 2 turns after that.
I'll give you a great example of one of these commanders from my collection, Scarab God.
Yeah.
Sounds weird to say because it's one of these kind of engine commanders. So after a board wipe, I'd love access to my graveyard, right? I'd love a bit of scrying in my upkeep. But first, I have to set up a board state to scry.
Yeah.
So it's not good casting into an empty board
He's
state.
not a zombie. He doesn't even scry 1 in your upkeep
No.
if you just have Scarab God.
Also, I'm not a huge mana deck, so probably casting him is the only thing that I'd be doing on that turn.
Yeah, you're certainly not paying 4 mana to get something back from the graveyard with his ability.
So what would I rather do? Well, I also run a Rise of the Dark Realms in the deck.
Yeah.
Now that there's been a board wipe, my graveyard is chock-a-block, so is everyone else's. Maybe I prioritize drawing as many cards as I can to find the Command the Dreadhorde or the Rise of the Dark Realms and reanimate my whole board. Scarab God would be a waste of mana instead of me casting a Fact or Fiction, for example, and trying to go deeper to find that way I close out the game following a board wipe.
Yeah, or even deploying a bunch of zombies and then getting Scarab God out to let you scry your way deeper into the deck and find some more ways to ramp, some more lands to play. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's also worth knowing, like, if you have the Enhancer commander, is this just a win more spell? And can you instead just go for the win right now?
Yeah, like casting a token doubler after, like, maybe you've got O'Hare in the command zone.
Yeah, sure.
Casting O'Hare when you've got 50 tokens already, maybe you should just cast Overwhelming Stampede or something like that. That would probably be better. And like, instead of just casting your commander because you think you have nothing to do, this is one of those things where you note, okay, I was in this position. Maybe I should be running more card draw so I can dig for the win condition in my deck. Because my commander, enhanced me so much, but then it got removed, I don't want to recast it because I've already been enhanced.
It's also worth recognizing just how close to a win you are, because it might not be this turn, but it might be this turn and the next turn if you just swing for combat damage enough times. There are certainly times...
And maybe just hold up protection spells to keep your board state safe.
There are certainly times in my Gandalf the White deck where it gets to a point where it's like, okay, I already have 2 Mere Battle Spheres and 14 Mere. I'm probably set. Like, I probably don't need Gandalf anymore because Gandalf is giving my stuff flash. It's doubling ETBs, LTBs. I don't need any more of that. Like, I've got everything I kind of need to go for the win at this point. And you're getting to a point of win more. And again, a board wipe will get cast. You might want to save yourself from that tax later.
And I think this is kind of a good tip on how to analyze your opponent's board states. Like if you're sitting across from Walt and Walt has got this massive board and has got his commander on the battlefield and you've got a targeted removal spell, don't use it on Gandalf because Gandalf has done its job. It's fulfilled its role in the deck. Salute to you, Gandalf. Well done.
That's definitely the next level of this, I think, for sure, is recognizing what role your opponent's commanders play in the deck. And certainly, there will be a point in every game where, I mean, it depends, not with WinCon commanders, but pretty much every other category of commander, there will be a point in the game where that line of text is blank. Like, it doesn't matter anymore what it does for the deck because the deck is done. It's cooked up a storm.
It's done its job.
Yeah.
I also think, interestingly, on the topic of enabling commanders, I do think that when you deploy an enabling commander, you should try, instead of casting your enabling commander and then holding up, and then casting... Like if you've got, a token doubler or your Gandalf deck, you cast your commander and then you want to immediately cast the thing that doubles.
Yeah, Solemn Simulacrum or something.
Maybe sometimes it is better to hold and wait and hold up protection spells for that commander because, you could cast your Gandalf deck and then cast a Mere Battlesphere and someone removes Gandalf in response to that and you go, oh, I'm now just doing a regular Mere Battlesphere. That feels really bad.
Yeah, there will totally be times like that. I mean, my Estrad the Masked deck is certainly one where there are times in a game where it's like, yes, this technically will do something for me. It might untap all my lands. It might put a mask on something, which is a Umbra Armor Aura, by the way. It's a token. But like, it's certainly a thing with a Planeswalker commander where you go, okay, she'll just die in combat.
Yeah,
like
I've got a 3/3 on my board. I'll swing it at Estrad because I should.
Because it's like objectively right for me to do. And there will be times where it's like, okay, it's definitely not worth me casting Estrad for whatever marginal gains I may gain right here if it's just going to die again. And it's, you'll run into similar cases. Like Planeswalkers obviously definitely do that. But if someone's got repeated removal on their board and they can see how important your commander is, like, I've got in my Knights deck Argentum Armor. When it attacks, you destroy target permanent.
I'm not casting my commander into an Argentum Armor.
If it's like, you really got to do, now we're almost like 3 levels deep here, put yourself in your opponent's shoes and go, to my opponent, how important does my commander look right now? And if the answer is really high, maybe don't cast it until you have that protection spell, until you have a Teferi's Protection, until you have a Swiftfoot Boost,
until you can remove the Argentum Armor. So every time the Argentum Armor creature swings, it's not there anymore and it's not blowing you out.
Definitely.
And I think, again, I just really want to highlight this. While you're playing and while you're thinking with this lens, this is really good stuff to take note of, to go back and tinker with your deck.
Yeah.
Like if you end up in a position of, thinking to yourself, I wish I had access to my commander sooner, because that might be a sign you might want to put more ramp in the deck. Or if you're saying my commander always gets removed and then my deck does nothing, that means you could be running one of those enabling commanders, so you need to run more protection.
Yeah.
Or just give up on that deck idea. Like a lot of enabler commanders are a bit glass cannon-y, as we talked about, so maybe you just pass on it. Yeah,
I think you definitely need to take note of how the deck is actually performing, because it's like, when we talk about our numbers of the deck building template, we give these, a lot of them are soft numbers, could go as high as this, could go as low as this. And it's because you'll ultimately need to feel it out with a deck, because there will be decks that seem like they should have a bunch of enhancers in there, and then you go, oh no, my commander is my enhancer, I don't need any more of these. Yeah. Look, our commanders are usually the first thing we put into our deck, but we can't forget why we put them into the command zone in the first place. It is performing a specific role, and if we contextualize that role when we build our decks and when we pilot them, we will make sure it does its job in the best conditions possible. You wouldn't ask a gymnast to perform a floor routine on concrete,
So don't do that to your commander. So, Space Commanders.
Command received.
Sweet. Wow, that was a chunky episode, but it was honestly 7 different types of commanders to cover. I'm not surprised we were going for about an hour and a half there.
Yeah, I'm shocked that we haven't done this before. Like, it seems like such an important thing for people to take note of.
It really contextualizes your entire deck building process.
It changes everything fully.
Your deck building and your piloting.
Yep.
Just
everything.
how you approach the whole deck from the start to the finish of the game. Yeah.
So to you listeners, do you feel commanded? What do you think of the commander roles that we highlighted here? Are there any roles that your commander serves that you think that we missed?
Yeah, to be honest, when I was scrolling through EDH Rec, I could see a couple more categories that might exist and share some commonalities.
I think we covered the main one.
Yeah, those 7 are probably like the most common, I'd say. Look, you can talk to us on all those social media platforms that we're on, at Get Commanded on all of them, but really the funnest place to talk to us is live in our Twitch chat at twitch.tv/getcommanded, where you can watch us play real Commander, not just talk about it. We do play the game as well.
You can see those 7 categories of Commander in action because I probably own all of them.
Yeah, I probably own a lot of engines and enhancers is what you'll find from my...
Likely.
When I was looking at my commanders, I was like, I have a preference to what I like in my command zone.
I didn't want to say it, but as you were describing engine, I was like, that's the James deck.
That's
right
the
there.
James deck. Just incremental value, baby.
Yeah. And of course, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. It's linked in the show notes. It's the absolute best way to support the Get Commanded podcast. We'd like to thank our patrons, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, Dyer, Dylan Norg, Bertie, Crazy Logic, and Benjamin. And an extra special shout out to Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under, who support us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best.
You are the best. And Patreon has just had a bit of an update.
Yeah, a little refresh, little visual facelift.
Bit of a spit and polish kind of thing.
Notably, I would say, if you haven't visited there in a while, check out our About.
Yes.
That's the big one that's gotten a change. A lot of the things that we said we were aiming for with our Patreon money have happened. So
we've got new microphones. We have been to events around Australia.
So we absolutely owe all of that to our patrons, so we can't thank them enough for that. But yeah, if you haven't already considered joining the Patreon, have a look at that. Have a look at the About. Specifically towards the bottom, we've added a few new things that we're now shooting towards with our Patreon money, and notably quitting our jobs. But long-term goals. But yeah, like literally every single person who joins the Patreon does just incrementally improve the podcast because it goes into the resources that we have access to, and it allows us to devote more and more of our time to this thing.
And also the benefits for you guys now after this refresh is huge. We have now added at every tier Patreon exclusive content.
Yes.
Every single Patreon will now receive exclusive posts from Walt and I and the monthly Meteor completely unedited, which is really cool.
Every month.
We had a couple of cheeky patrons take screenshots of our faces in the unedited version, and we pulled some
censored
whoppers.
Thing that Walt said at the beginning of the Meteor.
Yeah, you can hear that. Thanks again to Palms Off Gaming for sponsoring this podcast. They make awesome deck boxes, sleeves, binders, and other gaming accessories, and some really cool wind cheaters, by the way. They're still in stock. You should get those. You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au/#GetCommanded to get 10% off your purchase and support us at the same time. So if you need a new deck box, some new sleeves, you go, Palms Off Gaming gear, and I support Get Commanded, that seems like a good deal.
Yeah.
palmsoffgaming.com.au/#GetCommanded.
Hell yeah. Well, that's all the magic stuff, I think. So we better planeswalk out of here. Somewhere else.
Your turn.
It is my turn.
Where are we going?
We're going to a little apartment in Los Angeles in 2012.
Is it a loft by any chance?
It is a loft.
Yes.
We're going to New Girl.
I love this show.
I had never seen it, and then thank the gods for the TikTok algorithm. I got some highlights that popped up in my feed, and I was like, this looks hysterical. This looks like my exact kind of show, like weird friendship hijinks.
But it's also
really
the characters are just so caricaturistic clowns. Like, they're hilarious.
The writing is so tight. Like, there are, in any given episode, there are like at least 20 zingers. Like, just a line that someone says that's like, holy cow, that on its own is an outstanding joke. And that was just like slid into the end of a sentence.
Can I ask, I'm going to predict your favorite character is Schmidt.
Likely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew it. I think Schmidt and you, like, you would like to play Schmidt, is what I would gather.
Absolutely.
See, I would like to play Nick.
Yeah.
I would love the Nick role.
I love Nick Miller.
Yeah.
He's so likable. I am weirdly attracted to him, which says something about me for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. There's like a weird
We'll break that down over a cup of tea after recording this podcast for sure.
psychological analysis. Anyway, no, look, I think like if you haven't checked it out before, give it a go. For one, it's a rare show where, you know, a lot of the time you recommend a show and you're like, you should start at season 4, see if you like it. You can start season 1 of New Girl and it is already the whole show. Like
It jumps straight into it.
and
yeah.
it's already outstanding. Like the first maybe 3 episodes, you know what New Girl is. If you don't like it by then, you won't like New Girl.
Yeah. Look, it's a bit like, it's one of those shows that's a bit like repetitive, kind of does the same jokes a few times.
Yeah.
And it like the characters are very caricature-y, like they're very like caricatures of themselves.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think fair enough, some people might not like that. They might find it a bit cringy.
Yeah.
But it's easy watching and
Super
it's
easy.
funny jokes. Like one of my favorite things, and I say this all the time to Theo, we could cut out coupons.
Oh.
Coupons. Where Schmidt's talking
Schmidt
about...
has so many words. He says weird. I like how he says chutney.
Oh,
Chutney, any type
yeah.
of chutney. There was one of the highlights that popped up in my TikTok that was part of what got into the show was him reeling off the things he loves about India. And he's like, I love mango chutney, really, any kind of chutney. It's a whole list of Gandhi,
the
Ben
whole
Kingsley.
dynamic between CC and Schmidt is
So
like
good.
one of my favorite arcs of the whole show.
It's really fun. I think one thing I'll say for it, like you said, it's repetitive. I love that, like, you know, often with a sitcom, you have to define the situation,
Yes.
right? You know, like, even in Seinfeld, you would say, okay, it's a stand-up comedian. I mean, the joke is it's a show about nothing, but you'd still go, it's a stand-up comedian engaging in relationships in New York. That's probably what you'd say. And thinking about the way that relates to his material, that's the situation. The situation of New Girl is literally like, she broke up with their boyfriend and moved in with 3 single guys. That's it. That's the whole situation. Everything else that unfolds is just character moments, weird, goofy shenanigans, hijinks. Like, there's not really season arcs of any kind. It's just like...
There's a few. Like,
okay, I'm still early, to be fair.
Yeah. There's a couple of, like, seasons where it's like, oh, this season's about this relationship.
Okay, I'm seeing that.
Yeah.
I'm seeing, like, relationship development being a thing, but there's certainly not like blah, blah moved out. And that's, like, the arc that we're in. Like, it's like there's episode-long arcs and there are, like, season-long relationship dynamics, but there are not, like, stakes. Like, you don't get to episode 1 of a season and get introduced to this new thing and go like, oh no, what's that gonna mean? It's like, no, it's the same show.
Okay, strap in because it gets really interesting. I didn't know that you were only just starting out.
I'm like midway through season 2.
Okay, I won't spoil anything, but like towards the further end of the seasons, you'll get some of that juicy, like
some more arcs. Okay.
The stakes will be raised.
Look, honestly, I'm so fine with no stakes at the moment. Like,
It's
the writing and the characters and the acting are that good. I'm just like, if you can stay in no stakes territory forever, I'll be happy as well.
Well, should we leave the podcast and go cut out some coupons?
Some coupons.
Some coupons.
And maybe have some chutney. That's all we have time for. We'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
Goodbye, Commander Coupons.
Baha. Yeah.